Hey guys, welcome back. So here's our brace we were working on. When we left off yesterday, we were ready to weld it. So today we got this welded. Let me show you what we got. So you can see here, we got some tacks there. If you come to this side, again, more tack welds. And then lastly, this side. And I think it's also wrapped on the other side, out of camera view. But anyway, we got all that tacked. And what we noticed is this brace just looks like hell. Needs a paint job. So that's what we're gonna do. So we took a wire wheel and a drill and just kind of went all over it to kind of knock all the rust off and loose paint, try to get it cleaned up. And it actually seemed to do pretty good. And then I have a little bottle of acetone. So I took some acetone and a white rag, wiped it all down. You can see all the junk that came off. So now this part's pretty clean. So went to the store, bought some satin black spray paint. About to hit it with a couple coats, clean it up and let it dry, and we'll put it back on the car. By the way, for those curious, this is the paint we're using. I've never used this. Oh, I've used Rust-Oleum, but not this particular one. So it's an all-in-one paint and primer, satin black. That's about it. Hopefully it does a good job. Oh, it's also worth mentioning, I'm a terrible painter, so I probably shouldn't do this. Right now I'm going to say it can't possibly be worse, but we'll see. Well guys, here we go. We just painted it, painted the other side, flipped it over, painted this side, letting it dry. So we'll see. This is supposed to be satin black, so it lays down as like a gloss, and then as it dries, maybe it'll not be glossy, or maybe it'll be patchy, because in the past when I paint with stuff, it turns out weird. So we'll see, but at least it's all the same color. I do think that part will hold. Well, it's been drying for maybe an hour, and kind of hard to say. It's got some flatness, but glossiness. Looks to me more like a semi-gloss than a satin, but maybe that's because I put the paint on too thick. I don't care. I think it looks all right. So we're gonna let that dry. It's actually dry to the touch, but they say it takes 24 hours. So we'll probably just put that on tomorrow. So now we'll move on to probably the AC system. All right, so we're about to attempt to install the AC condenser and the dryer. So the first thing we got to do is pull this bumper off and see what kind of space we're working with. I'll also go grab the condenser and dryer and show you what those look like. So one of our little marker lights had died. So we bought the new bulbs. These are part number 194. About to swap that out. Yay! Well, here's what we got. So you can see we got some of this old ducting in there. No idea if that's going to stay or not. Intercooler, this one's like 20, the core itself is 20 inches, 12 tall, 2.5, no, I can't remember, 3 deep? Yeah. We're going to put a bigger one down the road, so we're going to try to keep that in mind whenever we install the AC condenser, which I also don't know where we're going to put it either. Yeah, we're going to see what happens. This may turn into a giant mess, we'll see. Alright, upon further review, we still don't know what we're going to do, but I think we need to take some more stuff apart. So we are going to remove some of this ducting. So the plastic ducting is coming off, this metal ducting is coming off, this plastic, whatever that's called, crash structure 5-mile-an-hour bumper thing. I don't think I've ever had that off the car, so we're going to pop that off, hopefully. These bolts look rusty, so that could be interesting. And I think we may even pull the fender liners, because I think these have to come out anyway for the wheels to fit. So I'm just going to take some stuff apart so we can get a better view of what we're working with and kind of figure out how we're going to do this, because we got some design considerations to think about when we're laying out our heat exchangers. So real quick, let's go over the heat exchangers and design considerations, what we need to think about. So we know we have to have a radiator for the engine to cool the coolant. That's a given. There's no getting around that. We're going to use an air-to-air intercooler, so we have to have an intercooler. No getting around that right now. We have a transmission cooler up here between the intercooler and the radiator. It's out of sight right now, but there is one. I don't know if you can... Now I got metal ducting under that. Above that metal, you can actually see the hose. That hose is a transcooler. So you can't see it there because of the metal ducting, but it's there. So there's a transmission cooler. I probably need a transcooler, and it doesn't have to go there. It could go just about anywhere. And then we need a AC condenser. Now we actually used to run that in the trunk. We're moving it back to the front, so it has to go in the front. So that means at a minimum we have 3 heat exchangers that need to fit in the front of the car. The radiator, the intercooler, and the AC condenser. Now here's the thing. For best performance, all of them should only, like each one needs clean air to be the most efficient, or most effective I should say. But that's not possible. So only one can be first. And it's not the radiator. Radiator is going to be last. And that's okay, because the engine coolant is going to be around 200 degrees Fahrenheit. So even if it's getting, 150 degree air, it can still cool the coolant with a 50 degree delta in temperature. So then we come to the intercooler. Well, you always want that to be as cold as possible for performance. So that's, you definitely want that one in the front. And then you have the AC condenser, which if you want your optimal AC performance, you also want that in the front. So as you can see, we're immediately hit with a compromise. The AC condenser and the intercooler are both competing to have cold air. And one of them is going to have to suffer at the expense of the other. Or, whatever. Said that wrong. But anyway, we got to figure that out. And I'm actually, even right now when I'm about to install this, I still don't know which way I should put this yet. So we're going to take this apart, and if one option just really lends itself to being the easier option, we'll probably use that to make the decision. And if they both look equal, I don't really know. But yeah, we'll see. So for now, we're going to start taking stuff apart so we can get a better view of what we're working with. Alright, we got this thing coming apart. Man, it's kind of nasty under here when you start pulling this thing apart. So we had some sheet metal ducting on top of that 5 mile an hour bumper. We removed that. We wanted to remove the 5 mile an hour bumper, and to do that, we had to pull the headlights to gain access to these bolts that used to be here. God, look how dirty that is. We're going to have to clean all this in a little bit. But it's coming apart. We're going to pull, you can see this little corrugated plastic stuff. It's bolted in. We're going to take that out. Next, we can start to see heat exchangers. You can actually, let's see if we get the camera light in there. Yeah, you can see that's the trans cooler hiding in there. So we'll figure out what we're going to do with that. But yeah, for now, we're going to keep disassembly. We're going to pull those little plastic pieces, take that horn off, and go from there. Alright, so we got to this point. We got that little plastic piece off. We can kind of see the intercooler now. We can see our trans cooler hiding in there. We got this piece of sheet metal. I guess that's part of the car's structure, but man, it's all dirty. We need to clean it. I'm half tempted to grab a Sawzall and chop that thing off, and I know that's a whole can of worms, so I haven't decided what I'm going to do yet, but for the space in here, you can see we've got some room up here. That hood latch really gets in the way. I've always wanted to change this, so I guess if we cut all of this out, we'd have to put something back to add some strength, and that would be a project on its own. On the upside, we would have a lot more room for heat exchangers, which would be nice, and proper ducting and things like that. So we're kind of at a crossroads. I'm not sure what we're going to do. This little plastic side pieces, I got the bolts out, but they still won't come out because I ran hoses through them. So I think I'm just going to cut them with a knife and rip them out, because if we put whatever we put back there, I might use like a piece of cardboard as a template, but then I'm going to try to get some metal, and anything that goes in there will hopefully be metal next time. Although admittedly, plastic is lightweight and it works. So functionally, there's really nothing wrong with plastic, but it just doesn't look as good. But since I don't think I'm going to use these, we're probably just going to cut those and rip them out. And then stare at this and try to figure out what we're going to do. Alright, we got these little plastic ducts off. So this is kind of the space we have if we don't cut anything further. Let's see if that... Oh, sorry, this plug's in the way. There we go. See, we got our radiator, our trans cooler, intercooler. So we can see, radiator actually has, this little corner has a direct path with air. Over here, same thing, it's just that trans cooler. And this trans cooler is a pretty open design. I don't know if you can tell, but that doesn't restrict it too much. And it also, I think that does go all the way down to the bottom. But anyway, decent amount of air path, and there's a little bit around the intercooler tanks. And then you got the big intercooler up here. But there's a good gap between these. You got a few inches there for air to go around the intercooler and back to the radiator. It's not a terrible setup, but we got to get a condenser in there. So let's grab the condenser and grab our dimensions and see what we're going to be working with. Well, here's the parts. They're still packaged. Well, not that, but that's the dryer, and this is our condenser. We're going to unbox this and grab our measurements with a tape measure. Just kidding. Before we get to the tape measure, check this thing out. It's pretty big. So the dimensions of this, I had a reason for getting this, but this is a 4-pass condenser, and it's really wide. So this is, if memory serves, this is, well, actually I have a stock one over there I can measure. But I'm pretty sure this is not as tall as the original, but it's wider than the original. And for some reason, I thought this would be better. So that's what we got. But yeah, check this out. So this is actually a 4-pass. So let's see. I'll bring you right back after I figure out how this thing works and explain it. Alright, so this is like my 4th time filming. But this time I think it's going to make sense. So over here on the left, we have 2 fittings. It's kind of hard to tell, but that bottom one's a little bit smaller than the upper one. The upper one's a bit bigger. So the top one is actually where the Freon enters. So when Freon leaves the compressor, it's actually a gas, not a liquid. So it's going to enter this top port, and it's going to exit this bottom port. So when I say top and bottom, this top port has to be at the top. It can't be at the bottom. I'll explain that in a second. And just so everybody knows, I've made this mistake before, and it just results in all kinds of problems. So this is actually a 4-pass heat exchanger. I'm sure y'all have heard of like dual pass, triple pass. This is a quad pass, 4 rows. And I drew some arrows so you can kind of see how this works. So you'll note here, we see Freon enters that top, and we see the arrows, and you'll note, it's hard to see, there's a wall right there. You can kind of see the little casting mark. That's a divider that stops Freon from flowing all the way down this tube, which forces that top section to go across. Now when you get over here, we have another divider wall. Let's see, kind of hard to, well, okay, you're not going to see the wall here, that's why, sorry. So over here, where we have that wall, you have to kind of follow the tube across, which is what I drew with the arrows. And then that moves down until you run into another wall. So you can see, that makes that section, the Freon loops across and goes in the other way. And from that wall, if you follow that across, now Freon has to jump around this way, down into here. We have yet another wall. And you'll note this last wall, there's only 3 tubes below that. Whereas if you go to the top section up here, there's a whole bunch of tubes before we get to that wall. So I'll explain that in a second. But anyway, that's your 3rd pass. Shoots across, comes around, and then back one more time through those last 3 tubes, and then that goes into our small fitting. So the idea is, in the top, this fluid is entering as a gas. And because it's a gas, there's a high velocity. It's flowing very quickly. So that gas is given many tubes to flow through. And it kind of slows it down, and it flows across here. And as it cools, this thing's called a condenser. Well, that word is exactly what it's doing. It's condensing a gas, cooling it off into a liquid. This is just like if you see steam hitting the top of a pot lid of, like say you put a lid on a pot, and when you take the pot lid off, water just pours off the lid. That steam that hit that lid, the lid's cool from like the inside of your house. So that steam, which is a gas, cools off and condenses and turns into a liquid. It's the same exact thing happening here for the same reasons. So you have a gas comes in, shoots across, and by making all these loops back and forth, it progressively keeps getting smaller. So, you know, we started off with like 10 different tubes or something, and it progressively gets smaller down to 3. And the reason they can do that is it's becoming a liquid. So say at the top you might have a 100% gas, and then by the time you get to the very bottom, this is 100% liquid. And hopefully it's 100% liquid before it even gets there. That just means your heat exchanger is working great, and then you get some supercooling. But anyway, this is that's why they do this 4-pass system. It's just more efficient, and it allows you to still have ambient air hitting this last little bit. So you try to condense all that Freon as much as you can, hopefully all of it, and that improves the AC efficiency. That's one of the reasons I bought this condenser. I don't actually know if the factory condenser is a 4-pass or not. It probably is. I have a factory condenser, so I'll tell you what, I'm going to go look and see if I can find any answer to whether or not that's the case. Or, well, the factory one I have is just like a aftermarket one, so from like Rock Auto or something. So maybe it is, maybe it's not. But this is a 4-pass for sure. It was advertised as a 4-pass, and it definitely is. And like I mentioned earlier, this thing's wider than the factory one and narrower. So hopefully that doesn't turn out to be a detriment. Hopefully that turns out to be a good thing. And since this is a universal condenser, you can see they got mounting holes everywhere. So that's kind of cool. We can chop off the ones we don't need and use the ones we do. So hopefully this isn't too hard to install. I know, famous last words, but let's hope this goes fairly smoothly.